Let's see here. Hi, everybody. So I'm going to continue streaming Diablo 3. I've already talked about a lot of the balance of items and reasons choices were made. You know, for everything from the UI to monsters to effects and such. So I think the core of the game, yeah, we've talked about. I'm going to continue to play through. And what I'm going to start to get into is just like advantages and disadvantages of different design systems, and just like say, hey, if we were to change this area of the game, what would that affect? And that could be everything from I'm not going to create a new hero, but let's just say I did for a second. Um, you know, like the choice to have a list of heroes over here versus having all the heroes sort of, all on the screen at once, sort of like they did in Diablo 2. Well, like obviously, like this is much. If I wanted to add, say, a necromancer, I don't have to redesign this whole screen. That's great, right? I could just make this list longer. And little choices like that in game design can make a big difference as you go forward, right? So, like, not necessarily better or worse, just advantages and disadvantages. So I think that's something I want to continue just touching on and just like, hey, if we were to change this, right, as an example, this screen, and back to the old Diablo 2 sort of like, cast of characters selection, well, now that's cool. I can see all the characters and I click on them and they step forward or whatever. But, if I'm going to expand the game, if I'm going to add to the game, if I'm not sure how many classes I have, or like especially as design goes on, if the male and female, well now I have less room. Do I have to have male and female versions of every character out there? Like maybe I didn't know that when the game's I started designing or building this game. All those things factor in. So you know. It's that kind of choice that you're going to make throughout like developing a game and designing a game, and it's cool to look at that kind of thing um, and sort of see where they came from. Last time I got some feedback that my game audio was a little high. Turned it down. Feel free to tell me if it's too quiet, too loud, whatever. Um, yeah, so I'm gonna start. I'm gonna keep playing, and we'll just keep talking about game stuff. Loading. All right, so I got a new follower. That reminds me, right? I've totally like might have forgotten what a follower is. It's great that that little tutorial pops up right when I get into the game. Also, it's been about a week since I played, right? Like, where does this go? I guess. Oh, cool. Like, it's great that I can just hover over the little portal and see where it's going to. But also, like, I have an objective still, and this stuff is like, well, obviously you have an objective. You had an objective before. But the reason I call this stuff out, right, is, if I wanted to make changes to a game like this, because that's anytime you're designing a game, you're gonna change something, or like, what's the point? You might as well just, not build a new game, and we can just all play the game that's already built. So, but when I'm gonna make changes to a game like this, you have to understand all the repercussions of the change. And like, let's say for example, I was like, oh, I want the objectives to be more freeform. I don't necessarily want an objective log. I want the player to be able to explore a little bit more. One of the things, that might not be readily apparent that you're gonna have to come back and touch on is, well, how am I gonna remember what I was doing? And I know that's like, oh, well, just remember, you won't just remember, right? Like, all different games do it different ways. Like, a lot of story games will be like, last time on blah, right? Last time on Walking Dead, whatever it may be. Um, you need cues for the player just so they can be like, oh, where was I? I don't remember at all. Before we get started, I'll just dump some things at this merchant guy here. Then I'm gonna look. Don't care. Don't care what these items are. Cool. I probably just sold like the best stuff. Don't even know. Oh well. I'm sure I'll find better things later in the game because that's the way this game works. All right, I'm gonna go in the hole. Computer level 4. There's Royal Crypts. One other thing I can do that's sort of cool. I'm actually gonna go back here.
I need to go
back to town because I think search the Royal Crypts. Where are the Royal Crypts? It's telling me to go. That's where I am. Cathedral level 3, Interesting. So, I noticed that this is blinking on the map. That's another little touch, right? Little things like that, just really cool stuff that they do, just to help you remember. Again, just thought it was sort of interesting. All right, so enemies. Okay, so these guys have crazy glowy shields. I'm guessing that means something. I'm not sure what, but probably means something. Call my dogs up. Oh, where's my shift key? There it is. So I'm feeling a little lazy today.
Need more time.
And you know, one thing we talked about before is the fact that you have all these different skills and like, it's like, oh, well, one of the disadvantages of their system, you know, if I level up and I don't really like the skill, then I just didn't really get a reward. That's sort of crappy. One thing that is nice is like today I'm not really feeling like trying to click on everybody because clicking is hard. And, you know, I can switch my little spider skill and I have some, you know, change it up. Maybe I'm getting bored of playing a witch doctor. You know, there is some advantage there, and just that at any time I'm starting to feel like, you know, boredom or tedium, I can just change that up. And that was an interesting design choice, right? So, in general, too, as I play through this, I'm noticing, like, there's all these different monster types. And, like, these guys have glowy shields. I don't know if that's just an effect or if, like, glowy shields are different than non-glowy shields. That's sort of an interesting question. I don't know. But one thing to think about, like, as you're designing your monsters, right, is why? Like, why am I making another monster? Why do I need another monster? Do I really need another monster? And what is good monster design, right? And that really depends on the type of game you're making, right? I really interesting. You know, it really depends what kind of game you're making, all that. But I think that the core of it is if a monster doesn't change the way the player plays, you have to ask yourself, why does it exist? Like if I'm going to have a skeleton, and then I'm going to have a goblin, right? Or something, doesn't really matter. And they both play like you fight them exactly the same way. Why did I even bother to add the goblin, right? And I think, you know, you could say, the next question, right, the next thing that comes to mind, you know, if I'm thinking like, well, I have a goblin because, you know, I have woods area and a crypt area, and woods area and crypt areas are different. And so obviously I need a skeleton for a crypt.
For my last attempt to honor
but then I would say, the next question in my mind is, do you really need a crypt area and a woods area, right? And obviously that's a bigger question for your game, but it's the type of thing you need to think about. Like,
but I fought on.
If they're not changing the gameplay, what are you doing? Well, you're increasing the length of your game, which might be important, right? Visual variety. But man, it's great if you're adding some kind of, you know, different mechanic. And, you know, Diablo does a good job of that sometimes, like a lot of times, right? Right? It's rare that, I mean, there's times when you're like, oh, well, this skeleton fights exactly like this demon guy. They both run up to you and they swing their sword. But what I think is interesting about what Diablo does, and it's something to think about for your own designs, right? Or just when you're trying to understand games and you're playing them and you're just thinking about them from, you know, the way a designer would look at things. It's, you know, the skeleton does change in Diablo when paired with other guys. Like, you know, you get the guys that like raise skeletons from the dead and then they form back together and like rebuild, right? And then all of a sudden having a goblin and a skeleton next to each other starts feeling very different, you know? I'm gonna chase this treasure goblin. This is so awesome. I gotta go out just, yeah, I got a yellow thing. I love sometimes nostalgia stuff. I just do. And if anyone has ever played Golden Axe, they totally know where that guy came from. That's amazing. I love Golden Axe. That was a great game. Interesting. I didn't. Okay, because yeah. I don't have to roll to identify this one here. It's not the orange or whatever. They changed what is identified. cool. Um, but you know, it's just something to think about. It's like, if you're gonna add a new enemy type, how's it gonna change the player's experience? And it's really important that I think that you do, right? Because otherwise, the game, when you feel, if the player's getting bored in your game, it's probably because you're doing too much of the same thing, right? You know, you're not changing up their experience. You're just doing the same thing over and over again, and it starts getting boring. So, you know, it's just something to think about. How can I make that new enemy? Do I need that new enemy type? Do I need the new level that would require the new enemy type? Do I need a crypt versus a forest? Well, how is a crypt different than a forest? And if your answer is just, I want to make my game bigger, maybe just make a smaller game and release it for less money and move on to the next one, right? I mean, like, you know, I think that there's something to be said about length and stuff, but you should have some differences anytime you add something, right? Or you're just changing the art out. And you might as well just make a mod for Diablo and skin it. So, anyways, there's a big sword here. I love this. This is like an active trigger. I'll call it an active trigger, right? I could, you know, this is not gonna like initiate until I pull this, and this is a really cool mechanic, a thing you can do for players. And why might you do this? Well, they're trying to make it a big moment, like, ooh, this is a sword I'm trying to get, and we grab the sword and something's gonna happen. That's cool. You know, it's a story moment or whatever. It's like, oh, the sword and the stone. I pulled the sword and crap happens. But there's other reasons you might want to use a trigger like this. Let's say you had a boss fight in a room that's going to have a bunch of mobs, right? Like a bunch of enemies before the boss spawns. Well, maybe I want to let the player decide when to spawn the boss, right? I mean, it's like, you know, as opposed to I walk in the room and the boss spawns when I get to a certain area. Well, I have to perform an action to spawn the boss, so I can, you know, clear the room first, or, you know, I can set up traps or do whatever I wanted to do prior to spawning that boss, right? There's a lot of advantages to active triggers. You know, disadvantages obviously is, if you think about, like, this is pretty, I could, if I was just like, for some reason I missed this, right? Let's pretend as a player, I'm just like, I walk in and I'm like, oh, there's a sword here, but I didn't click it for whatever reason. Maybe there's somebody standing near it and I missed it, or I just wasn't paying attention. Somebody distracted me. I looked away from the screen and I kept going. Well, now, oh, interesting. They might have spawned it anyways.
We shall put you down.
Yeah. So, any case, you know, you go on, right? That was just like, I wonder, would this have done the same thing? Oh.
Keep your distance from it. This burden is mine to bear.
Interesting. So this is a story moment, right? I guess this guy spawns either way. So if I miss this little story moment, but I didn't basically get myself in a situation where I was waiting to progress, or had to find this thing to progress. That was what I was getting at with the disadvantage with active triggers. Like, imagine if I walked by it and I walked in this area, and what Blizzard did is they actually made it so the boss spawns when you get to this area, right? If they didn't do that, if they made it so it was an active trigger, right? And they made it like, hey, it's, you know, until you hit that, pull that sword out, the boss will never spawn. If I missed it and I just didn't see it, you get yourself in that situation where you're just walking what feels aimlessly, right, around a level going, I have no idea what to do. And I think we've all, you know, been there. Like, you've all played the game where you're like, what do they want me to do? Like, what does this designer want me to do? And you feel like you've gone everywhere in the level and done everything you need to do, and it's like, oh, they wanted me to pull the lever in the corner to do this thing. Well, I didn't see the lever. Oops, right? And that's a problem with active triggers. That's a hard thing. And you know, it's like, okay, well, what are my mitigations? Like, how can I solve that problem, right? How can I ensure that the player doesn't miss the sword? One is good placement. You know, we saw that here. You know, it actually ended up being a story moment, not a boss spawn. It's been a while since I played this game. I don't remember these things. But, you know, if I miss the sword, I get to the next story moment, it triggers anyways. It's not like I had to touch the sword to get to the next thing, right? So you could do like that kind of fail safe where like, oh, if they miss the lever and then they go much farther, I'll do this thing. You can have, you know, just good placement where like that, I like had to walk through that area. And that won't guarantee anything, you know, but it will,
is the essence of what it
I want to
means to be
change
a
this. This drives me nuts.
Focus is good, but do not let it narrow you.
Any case, um, skills, I can't remember. Any case, the thing I was getting at, right, is the other mitigation. So you place it well, right? Great. I can actually, in combat, it thinks I'm in combat. I was missing that. I'm like, why can't I do that? I don't know why it thinks I'm in combat, but it does. Okay. So in any case, so one is good placement,
Not ready
right?
yet.
That's, you know, you can't, that won't guarantee anything, but it helps, right? Like if they put that sword like in the corner of some dead end, I probably would never find it. You can do those mitigations. You can put multiple swords. I mean, with the sword, it doesn't necessarily make sense because it's Lyric's sword. There's probably only one of them. But you know, you could have like 3 of a thing in a level, and make them only find 1. Right? That's another option with an active trigger. You could, when they get in the area, you could have a character be like, "There's the sword. We need to interact with it." Right? Or like a tutorial pop up. Obviously, the disadvantage of that. The second you do like a tutorial like that, right? It's sort of taking away autonomy from the player. It's taking away this like, it no longer feels like I decided to pull the sword. It feels like the game told me to pull the sword, and that's sort of sad, right? I mean, like, I love autonomy. For me, it's like I'm gonna try Plague Toads, new skill, and I'm gonna move this because I hate that I did that with the buttons. I had it on the wrong thing, in my opinion. I like it this way, because now I can click the move.
Not ready yet.
Cool. Any case, you know, the second you tell me to do something in the game, you're like saying, it's almost like being led by the nose, right? It's like, click this sword now. It's like, oh, come on, really? So that's a disadvantage of putting a hard tutorial on the active trigger, right? It didn't feel like I just discovered the sword anymore. It felt like the game told me to. So, you know, how could you mitigate that? And see what I'm getting at? Like, it's like, okay, well, when I put something simple, like an active trigger, right? Something the player has to do to progress in a game. Look at all those fallouts, right? Look at all the things that could happen. The player doesn't find it, right? That's huge. But then like, okay, well, I'll just tell the player when they get near it, pull the sword. But then that changes the whole emotion of the active trigger, right? Crap. Well, you know, so then let's like, well, how do I mitigate that? Let's say, like, well, then you could start thinking about, hey, there's this active trigger. I want the player to interact with it. I want them to find it and discover it on their own. Oh, they didn't. They missed it. They walked by it. Okay. Well, once you detect that they walked by it, you know, maybe then you say, well, if X amount of time has passed and they still have not found the active trigger, right, I will then be like, huh, wasn't there a sword in that last room? Right? You can do these like timed or like staged tutorials. Or like hints, right? Like have your companion character give you a little hint. Hey, I think you missed something. Right? And that's sort of the core of it, right? That's one way to mitigate that. You know, wow, I'm just murdering this guy. So, just talk about this boss real quick. I'm gonna try not to kill him. So he has like very arcadey behaviors, right? So he's got a pattern. He follows a pattern. What he was doing, you know, he's like, okay, I'm gonna teleport to a new location. Once, you know, I'm gonna do that a number of times. Once I get to a certain level of life or whatever, I'm gonna spawn ads, and you know, and you saw I just sort of murder faced them, right? And that's a problem, like, that RPGs deal with a lot. It's like, I didn't even get to enjoy that boss. Like, think about how much effort they put into building this boss, but because, you know, I just happen to be, you know, I think I'm a bit ahead. I found really good items. You know, I got lucky there. I think I'm a little bit ahead of where they want me to be in the power curve.
As the
And as
Skeleton
a
King,
result, the
until the
boss.
monarch's
Oh, that
son,
was cool.
Aiden,
As a result,
vanquished
the
him.
boss, just wasn't hard for me, and I didn't really get to enjoy him. You saw that helm there; it had a little ray on it, so I could find the legendary item easier. I really would notice it. I wouldn't miss the legendary item. That's a great little touch, right? Nothing worse than missing a legendary, being like, oh god, I'm so afraid I might have missed a legendary. Another legendary helm. That's sort of sad, being that I have a legendary helm. But hey, it's a better one, I'd probably. And we'll talk about base stats, because I haven't talked about base stats yet. So, in any case, I have, but not in this way. We'll see. You'll see. So, point is, like, it's a problem that RPGs deal with. Like, different RPGs have always been trying to deal with it in different ways. Skyrim or not Skyrim, Oblivion went way too far, and it's like everything levels with you, and it's like, oh, now the bear is, so much harder than he should be because I still can't kill a bear at level 50 or whatever. That's not really the right way to do things either. I don't think I was not a fan of that system, at least. But the concept they were trying to solve is a hard one, right? And there's different ways to do it. One thing that they could do, and I think they've done later, is like when you go into a dungeon for the first time or an area for the first time, it sort of scales that area to your current level, right? So if I'm ahead or behind or whatever, it sort of knows and adapts, right? So then it's not, it's just a little more. It gives the player a little more freedom, and it's not like, oh, I have to go grind for 10 years and then come back to this dungeon. But some of that's okay, right? Like I go into a place that's too strong, I gotta leave and come back. It's just what you're trying to do with your world and how you want to design it. But just like with the active triggers, like I just talked for like 15 minutes about active triggers and all the disadvantages and advantages of them, and I could go on for like 2 hours just about triggers, right? Like, the difference between like walking into an area and triggering a trigger because you're there and having to pull a lever, like all the fallout from that, right? And that's the type of thing you have to think about. It's like if you want to change something small, understand what you're doing. If I was going to make a game about finding evidence, right? And I had to find every piece of evidence in a level, that's going to be really frustrating. One of my favorite games of all time. I love Divine Divinity Original Sin. If anyone hasn't played it, Divine Divinity Original Sin, amazing game. I love it. Starts out with this murder mystery. It's great. Great RPG. A little bit hardcore in a great way. I love it. Anyways, Divine Divinity Original Sin. They often have, I think one of their weaknesses in the first game, one of the things I didn't enjoy as much, was that they don't tend to have as many multiple solutions as I want. What I mean by that is I'll go into an area, and they will expect you to find a switch behind a painting, and there is one switch behind the painting, and there might be a couple clues to help you find the switch behind the painting, but there's no other way to get through that level. There's not like 4 different clues to find the switch behind the painting. There's like one, and if you miss that, if your brain doesn't work that exact way, if that's not your type of intelligence, because people have different types of intelligence, they notice different things. Some people will be like, oh, there's a scratch on the floor, well that obviously means blah 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 blah. And some people just aren't perceptive about visually. They don't learn visually. Maybe they learn audio through audio. Maybe they learn through writing. So you gotta like having different ways, different types of clues for different types of people is really good. That game they get you in these things where I have to look things up online sometimes. I'm just like, I have no idea what they want me to do. There's only this one switch in this big room that they want me to find, right? And that ties back to that whole the same concept. Anytime you're gonna have something active for the player to do, an active trigger, right? Think about well, how do I make sure that they one feel smart and feel like they actually found that active trigger, and that they weren't just told pull the lever. They found the lever, they decided to pull the lever, they made the connection. If I pull this lever, it'll open that door, then I will fight the boss. That'll be cool. That's gonna make the player feel smarter. But the second you make that choice, you have to think about all the ways the player could miss it, and you can't just be like, oh, the player's dumb, they didn't get it. No, if they didn't get it, you probably didn't give them enough information. You didn't set the level up in a way where and no matter how you set it up, I could miss this. I mean, it'd be pretty hard. This is one of those things. Just look at this. But this is a perfect example of of them going, hey, We really don't want the player to miss this interaction. Like, look at this. I come in here, right? There is one place for me to go. It is a big, glowy, blinking thing on my map. I get down here, right? I come down here. This whole, if this was a painting, it would spiral toward the center and draw my eye to this dude. There's a huge effect. He fell into a crater. It's glowing. This door is locked, so I can't go on. I can't miss this. Like, that's how I mean, I can't go back up the stairs the other way. This is all just driving me to this location. And that's the type of thing you know, if you don't do this, they might miss it. And that's okay as long as you have other ways to guide them back. That's all. So just
So you
understand
are the fire that fell from
the
sky.
repercussions of those
Why
types of
do I find
changes.
you there? At
Understand the
source
types
of
of things
this
you're going to have
place
to
is
do to help the
darkness.
player because they might miss it. You know, they could have a kid and the kid runs in the room and they walk by it. It's not their fault. So just things to think
Do you
about.
remember why you are here?
I am not your enemy. I think. Yes, I believe I have come with a warning.
Oh,
The
just come with a warning.
The darkness is coming. I must. I don't remember.
I will take you to Cain. He will lead us to understanding.
So, darkness is coming. He doesn't remember. I'm taking the cane. So, let's look at those items. So what I said something about base stats, and I said this is probably a better helm. And I said that because the armor's higher. I mean, obviously, it might have horrible, horrible random attributes. I'll find out when I identify it. But what I mean by that, so when you, it's just like seeing under the hood again. When you're designing items, right? Like you can see required level. That's just a giveaway. Like if it requires a higher level, it has better base stats. And those base stats, in the case of a helm, the base stat is there's only one base stat, armor. As required level goes up, armor goes up. So the second you look at an item, you see, oh, that's got higher armor, you know, without any of the random attributes, you know, it's a higher level item. I didn't even need to see the required level as like understanding under the hood. I mean, that seems apparent, but when you think about how these items are designed, right? And I said, like, I was talking before in the previous in the previous stream about, you know, balancing all this for a player, and that base stat thing is huge. I know when the player has a helm, they're going to have at least at level 11, even if it's a white helm, right? Or like just totally common, like they're going to have X amount of armor. And maybe as rarity goes up, I make new base stats. You know, that depends. But that's the type of thing that's just something to notice, right? Again, if you're balancing your stuff, it's base stats for stats that get added through the magic stuff. And you know, you don't have to have base stats go up with level. You know, you don't have to. You could just make the magic attributes go up per level. It's just, you know, it does designate like this type of sword or this type of helm is better than the previous type of helm. In this case, they look the same, so you know it wasn't really necessary, but it's something they did. Identify what I get. Is it awesome? More damage. Increased effective gem. I really should just slot a gem. I feel like I've just failed at life by not slotting gems. I'm just garbage. I don't know what I'm thinking. It'd be, you know, no, actually it probably wouldn't matter because again, it goes back to that monster hit thing. I could slot a gem, and unless it makes me kill monsters and less hits, I don't care. It was a waste of time. I mean, if I'm going to be a power gamer anyways, it's just a waste of time. I don't care. So, moving on. The door opened. So I hit the trigger. The door opened. Right. Just going back to what I said. Hey, they didn't let me get messed up. They didn't let me miss this. They didn't let me go, oh, I totally want to click that, but I'm going to go this way and forget about it, and then I won't know where to go again. It's like, and think about all the scripting they would have had to deal with. Like, if they let you go past this, right? And I went to here, and I went back to town, and then, like, they'd have to have all, like, again, the things to remind you. They would have to remind me on where to go, because if I left for a day, and I had already went back to New Tristram, right? And I did everything that level, and I missed that trigger, and now I gotta. It's like now we gotta guide you back not only to that level and stuff, at that trigger point. That's just a lot of work.
He remembers little of himself.
New video.
I will bring him to Deckard Cain. Perhaps then he will have some answers.
So that's an interesting writing thing, right? They didn't tell me anything new. You know, it's just interesting. I'm curious as to why they made that decision. like when maybe they're like they realized people were clicking through, uh, when they clicked on the character there. I won't give away who it is. Spoiler. No, but when they clicked on the character there, a lot of people I bet you just clicked away and just sort of didn't listen and just went on. And I bet you, like again, user research, because they did user research, right? And they were like, wow, no one knows what's going on. They have no idea what's going on in the story. No one understands why they're talking to Deckard Cain at this point in the story, right? I bet you that's what happened. And they're like, okay, well, people aren't paying enough attention to what the characters say, so we're going to put in this bespoke cinematic that basically tells them what the character just said again. I'm betting that's why they did it. And the reason I say that is because, in general, you don't want to give people a new shot in a movie, a new like you don't want to give them new basically content that doesn't give them new information, especially when you're talking about story. That's just not good writing. But at the same time, I know Blizzard, they know what they're doing. These are some of the best designers in the world. They know how to write, right? This isn't a writing problem. They know exactly how to write. So when you see something like that where they duplicated information, you have to ask yourself, well, why would they do that? And assume the best, right? These are not like, it's not because they messed up. It's because they had a reason to duplicate that information. And in this case, I'm betting you, they just needed to enforce that in a subset of players who just missed it, right? They just missed that story moment. And for them, it's a big story moment, right? Like, who is this guy? This is a big mystery. I want to know who that guy is. Oh, Deckard Cain. We're reinforcing Deckard Cain. He is still the sage with all the awesome information. Let's talk to this guy and find out what we learned.
No man could survive such a thing. Who are you? What are you?
Again, he's reinforcing the mystery, right?
I came bearing grave news, but I cannot remember.
Your message might be all that can save us from impending doom.
So, a lot of shows and movies and things do that, and that's a common thing. You have the character that's like, sort of like, this isn't 100% what they did, but it's close, right? Like, if you ever need to tell the player something, right? It's like, or like the person experiencing your media, whether it be a film or a game or whatever. I need to tell them something in world, right? I need them to understand like how, I don't know, like magic works in my world, or how power sources work in my world, or whatever it may be. A lot of times it's good to have a character in there that asks the things the viewer, right, the person experiencing your media is trying, you need them to know. Like, you have the person sitting there like, how did they hack into the computer? And then you explain it to them. Or like, what is that thing over there? And they're like, it's a flying ship that was built, you explain what it is. And that naive character, right? The character that doesn't know, doesn't have the information right along with the viewer, can sort of like be that bouncing board, for the viewer, right? Because just like here, I don't know who this guy is. These are the questions I'm asking. Well, Deckard Cain's going to ask them for me, right? It's a good like storytelling, methodology. It's just, it's a common trope.
A sword of great power. It was part of me, but it shattered into 3 pieces as I fell.
It is vital that we find those pieces. I believe the sword made whole will restore your memory.
That's a little bit of a jump.
Through the field.
Little bit of jump.
Could the sword have anything to do with that?
Of course, of course. Just as the dead rose around the stranger, the sword pieces drove the goatman to madness.
I will bring back the sword and bring peace to the Khazra, one way or another.
Alright, so I'm going to the sword, going to find the sword, and for some reason that's going to restore his memories. Little bit of a jump. There, we'll just throw that out there. Not sure why the sword will restore their memories, but in a way it doesn't matter. It's sort of like, what's in the suitcase, right? That's like Pulp Fiction. If anyone's ever seen Pulp Fiction, it's what's in the suitcase. They never tell you, it doesn't matter. And I think that's really the point, right? It's like, it doesn't matter. It's
There's a sword here.
What matters in story is the interaction between the characters, right? It's the ways the characters change, the way they grow, the thing you know, the world, and how the world is really just a bouncing board for like, you know, how they interact with, you know, how they interact with this world and the changes of the world. There's a lot of things you do in the world too, but the point is, the core of it is like, it's about characters, and it doesn't matter if it's a sword that restores memories, or a, you know, or a magical orb that holds memories. It doesn't matter. What really matters is, you know, how are the characters going to change in that journey to get the sword? You know, so sometimes when you see things like that, you know, you just sort of have to spend your disbelief a little bit. Doesn't really matter, right? And sort of understand the goal of what they're trying to do there, which in this case I think is just like, well, I could equip the Templar. I forgot to do that. You know, it's a thing for you to go find to progress the story in this case, right? It's I don't know that my character will change in this journey. We'll find out. Maybe he will. Maybe I'll learn something new about myself, about my witch doctor self. Find out. So these guys, remember I was talking before about like monsters and how you shouldn't add them unless they change, like the way the player plays. These guys are a little bit different. Those guys are like, they run in fast. I bet you, if I was super range reliant, I have a lot of pets. So pets make my life a little bit easier and make you know, make it me less apt to notice those changes actually, right? Like, cause they're just gonna tank everything, and you know. But the little fast runners definitely would change my style of play as a ranged character that didn't have a bunch of pets, you know, basically acting as a shield. You had little charging guys that like would make me step to the side. Now, how do you make a player change more? Because I'm not really even engaging very much with the game. I'm busy talking, and I'm just not, you know, not trying to like be great at this game right now. But how could you force me to be great at this game? Like really engage with the game? Well, you could have made that charge, right, do a lot more damage. And I don't mean that in like, well, just make monsters do more damage. Because again, like you have to remember the difference between a dot, or like damage is very hard to avoid or impossible to avoid, like, especially if you're a melee character, you know, versus you know, that this like, look at that anticipation. Boom, you have this huge charge up, and then he like goes for it. I can easily dodge that, right? That is meant to be dodged, right? That is meant for the player to react to. And anytime you have something like that that's meant for the player to react, you know, if you don't balance it in a way that forces them to react, they might just not react, right? I mean, and that's, you know, I'm sure on harder difficulties too, that'll go up, and that's one way that they increase difficulties, increase that damage, and not necessarily the dot as much. So I can't go in there yet, I guess. Maybe I can go across? No. Great sadness. It's locked. Search den in the fields of misery. So that was another way they're like, hey, here's another area. We don't want them to get lost and miss the objective, so we're gonna lock them in here. You know, it's sort of the difference between like open world, truly open world, and not. But you know, again, if they let me go there, you know, there's a lot of repercussions, right? I might never. Where are the fields of misery? Like that might be the next question I ask myself as a player, and you know, there's just a lot of things they'd have to teach me about the world, then, and a lot of tools they'd have to give me to find my way out to where I want to go. So this guy, so he puts his hands in the ground. Those little guys come out. Cool. You know, so basically he makes, I bet you a lot of those guys together become very dangerous, right? Like imagine like he's putting all these plants out, you got a bunch of guys putting plants out. You know, basically in a game like League of Legends, I call that zoning. You know, you have tools to zone. In this case, they have tools to zone the player. What I mean by that is like, well, I want the player to stay far away from me. Let's pretend I'm a ranged guy. Well, if I put like a pit of damage between me and the player, you know, I've zoned him out. He can't come directly to me. He has to go around the pit, right? And those monsters, that AI sort of has zoning tools. He's melee, so it's not, you know, it's, but you can still have zoning as melee. Oh, that was cool. The tree tried to kill me. There's a little cool trigger effect. Alright, Enraged Zealots. So, you know, Diablo definitely has gone a little the way of, you know, of, hey, we're gonna change up these. We're gonna have a lot of guys fight exactly the same, but we're just gonna change the models on them, make them look different because we need, you know, to facilitate story, right? So, and that's okay. Like, you know, I was talking about, like, do you really need another monster type? Do you really need another area? Really? Well, it depends on the goal of your game, right? In a game, at least modern games, are not just about mechanics. This game, you know, is also about the story they're telling me. You know, this crazy girl with bats on her back. But you know, it's about the story they're telling me, and so, you know, so if that's your goal, maybe you do need to add a monster, and, you know, you want to put your effort there and your focus there, and it's not worth necessarily taking the time to make it fight like a whole new thing, right? Because you're only going to use it in this one scene. There's like cultists or whatever they were, and you're only going to use them in this scene, and that's okay, right? It's just understanding what the goal of your game is. Know, though, that, you know, if the cultists fought differently, that could be cool. That could be, you know, that could add more variety to your game, but you only have so much time when you're making games, and you know, you just need to focus. I forgot I can equip this guy, can't I? Inventory and skills. Oh, look at that. I haven't been doing anything. More taunt. Oh god. Now I'll do heal because I don't need more taunt. Enemies are slowed and regenerates for you and the Templar. We'll just go pure life gen stuff. Why not? Give him this crazy spear thing. Yeah. Ooh, actually, I'm gonna switch.
I cannot do that.
Oh, okay, fine. Can't use it. Fine. Give my guy a cool shield.
Good.
Yeah, he's happy. Ah, good, he said. He likes it. I feel good about myself. I helped him out. I did my job as a player. I'm adding value to the world of Diablo. It's all good.
There are forces arrayed against us that are stronger than
I have this thing where if a button is blinking, it drives me nuts until I click on it. It just does. Even if I know I don't actually care about anything under that button, I want to click on it because it's blinking. It's my problem with social media too. If there's a social media thing and somebody messages me, I just will have to click on it. So I just leave it closed most of the time because otherwise that's all I would do. You know, be distracted by all the different ways people communicate. It's just the way of the world. So these guys, these spawner guys, right? They're cool. Like, I loved these in Diablo, you know, in Diablo dungeons. Anytime you go into a dungeon, I really like those spawner guys. Out in these landscapes, you know, and I realize the landscape isn't so much about, is it as important, you know, or is it, you don't spend as much time there, right? It's not as, like, high risk an area. You know, if there's a high and low risk area, landscapes tend to be a little lower risk is what I found, at least early level landscapes. Those spawner guys are interesting, right? Because they really become dangerous in choke points. Like, if there is a long hallway and the spawner is at the back of the hallway, I now have to fight my way through that hallway. I remember, like, some amazing battles where, like, I knew there was 3 spawners in that room spawning skeletons, and I just could not get to them, right? Like, I was killing hundreds of skeletons, just fighting my way in. It's just like, you keep getting pushed back because there's just so many spawning, and you have to keep retreating, and it's great. And that's, like, you know, so enemy types, like, have different uses, right? Or they become more or less dangerous given their situation, and that's something else to think about. Like, if I was going to design a, you know, a procedural system like Diablo, like, hey, we're going to spawn random enemies in the dungeons, and random this and random that. It's really good to know, like, as a designer, what enemy types are good where, what enemy types are dangerous where, what enemy types are not. Right, like, quest items. We're talking about those too. Um, like you know, if an
Magda's
enemy type
words
like a
betrayed
spawner
her.
becomes
The
super
next
dangerous
piece
in
of the
choke points,
sword rests where
you know,
only
much harder to
ancients
deal
may
with,
tread.
you can
That makes
modify
me think
your
of the
procedural
drowned
system
temple near the
to make that
festering
happen in
woods.
higher
I
levels.
remember
You
you
can
telling me
you can
about it,
modify
Uncle.
your procedural system to make it
Exactly.
not happen if a guy
The
is like just
temple was home
would
to the
annihilate
Nephilim.
you in a certain situation. You don't want to just,
Your
it would be
knowledge
cheap.
could be
You know,
invaluable.
not even give the
You
player
must go
options,
and
just sort of
help
kill
our
him.
friend
You can make the
retrieve
procedural
sword
system
piece.
not spawn the enemy in
The
that
Nephilim
location.
were ancient
But to do
healers
that, you know,
with
you have to
untapped
understand
powers.
what enemies are
Legend
dangerous
holds that
where.
they
Like you
waged a
get the
terrible
charging
battle
guy,
near
the
the
guy
temple,
on the
and that their
landscape that
hosts
like
still
charged toward
war
you and
with
you had to
one
step to
another.
the side. Imagine him in a tunnel, right, or a hallway. You'd be, you know, if you don't have any outs, you're just gonna get hit in the face, right? Or you have to like move up and then like get him to charge and back up like right out of his range or whatever, and that could be cool. But that's the type of thing to think about, right? Like if I'm gonna add this guy, it's a cool new item. And it's a quest item, so I want to talk about it. But you know, if you're gonna have this procedural system, you have to think about like where do you want the guys to spawn. You have to understand where they should spawn, and you should design the system that way. Pure randomness is not necessarily a good thing. In a lot of like rogue RPGs or like games, you know, everything's a rogue RPG now. I feel like every game's a rogue RPG, but I exaggerate. But you know, there's some great things about rogues. I think that you know, I'll get into that too because that's a really cool topic. But uh, you know, everyone's sort of copying the roguelike, and just anyone that doesn't know where that came from, a roguelike is a basically there's a game called Rogue, and really it was permadeath and had lots of item drops, permadeath, lots of item drops, roguelike, Diablo. You know, if you play on hardcore, it has permadeath. Is it the armor worth it? Remember, everything is armor and damage. Is 11 intelligence more or less damage? You know, it's hard. I don't know. I'd have to do the math. And but you know what they did do? Stats changed if equipped. Isn't that great? Like like when I'm getting at like everything is health and damage. They boiled it. They understand that. They told me everything is health and damage. Look, toughness, damage, same thing. Recovery, you know, is really just health. They could have combined those two if they really wanted to, but they separated it for, you know, obvious reasons. There's a difference there to like you know, health over time versus health, but really it's just health. Yeah, they boiled it down for you. Any case, you know, quest items. I just sold a quest item. What is a quest item? Why does a quest item exist? Well, sure, it's a reward for doing a quest and all that, but it also is like a safety. If you're worried about the player falling too far behind, right? You like I mentioned, oh my god, I'm so overpowered at this skeleton boss guy. What if the opposite happened, right? And the player's like gonna fall really far behind. They never found a rare item ever, and they're sad and they can't kill anything and they're having a really hard time. Quest items help with that. If you put quest items in and you're like, hey, this is where the quest items are gonna be. They're gonna get this, and they're gonna get this, they're gonna get this. You can guarantee a minimum power level for the player, even if they get really bad dice rolls. Oh my god, I just don't get any rare drops. I'm so unlucky, right? You get that really bad playthrough, really bad dice rolls. The quest items are just gonna bring you up to that minimum bar, right? They're just gonna keep things balanced. And in an RPG, it's really hard, especially when you have randomness like this game does. So much of it, to keep the player in the right band, right? The right power band at each level. And that's one methodology to ensure that, you know, it's sort of like a safety net, if you will, to ensure the player never falls too behind in power, right? So quest items, what are they for? Well, sure, they give you a little emotional reward when you solve a quest or complete a quest, but they also, right, and I think from a pure balance perspective, you know, they're just keeping things balanced, and that's really important. So just something to think about. Why do quest items exist? I was talking about like every RPG
Needs
being a
more time.
roguelike now, and or not even every RPG, like everything. And you know, I think there's a really good reason for that. It's not necessarily, you know, it's not a bad thing. Like Dark Souls is very much
It is not safe
very
for you.
roguelikey,
This
right?
land is all my family has. I cannot leave.
It's a, you know, and I think that if you look at like games over the last like X years, you had this like, you know, you went from like, this game is just not going to tell you anything, and it's just going to murder face you, and that's just the way the game plays. And a lot of that came from like coin op, right? It's like, we need you to put more quarters in, because that's how we make our money. So, you know, it just was what it was. And it's again, not a bad thing. Developers need to make money, you know, or we starve and then we make no more games. That would be sad. But, you know, it's just, you just had to, you know, those arcade games back in the day, they're like, you know, one arcade game's like $4,000 or $5,000, and I'm not talking about like sit down racers. Those could be like 30 grand per arcade game, right? Like 30 grand. That's a lot of quarters. You know what I mean? Just to break even. I buy one of those, I put it in a bar or something, or like an arcade. Oh my God, that's a lot of quarters. So imagine like if somebody was to play from beginning to end through your game, and they get to the end, right? You know, they're probably not gonna play it again. They're like, I beat it, cool. Maybe they would, but the odds are low, right? So a lot of those games were designed to murder face you, and then you put more and more quarters in until you get good enough at the game, and usually a lot of them are pattern based, and you'd eventually memorize the patterns, and then you could beat them. And but like you'd probably have to play through, like you play through the same level over and over. Very Dark Souls, right? Very roguelike. And roguelike, if you think about what is a roguelike? Roguelike also has a randomness
After
element.
much searching, I have found a
Random
promising
levels,
lead. A family
lots of
named
item drops,
Tristram
permadeath.
has obtained a
Roguelike.
valuable
And I guess,
relic, and poor fools that they
so
are, they
think
haven't
about the
slightest
progression
idea
of
what
that.
to do with it.
So you
I
have
some
arcade
idea what to
games.
do with their
You have
daughter,
this thing
though.
of like, we're gonna
And through
murder
her,
face
I'll
you
get my-
over
You
and
there,
over because we
please help.
need you to
They're
play
going
through
to
the
kill
game,
my
and it's
friend.
really expensive to make these things, and we can't just make more content. We can't just make the game bigger because that would cost more money, and then we'd starve. So they're like, we're gonna create a mechanic that makes you play through over and over.
What
So
do
the
they want with your friend?
So Dark Souls doesn't have random dungeons, but that's fine. Still is roguelike elements. Anyways, so roguelike is sort of a reaction to that. It's like, well, I liked, like, as a player, a lot of players like the challenge that the arcade games provide, right? It's not like, oh, like a lot of modern games became the longer, if you played long enough, you would win. Like, eventually you're going to win. You know, you'll always make forward progression and you win. And beating a game was not necessarily being good at it, it was time spent. Right? I spent time. Oh yeah, I'm getting attacked. You know, I spent time playing the game. I eventually Nigel Cutthroat. Best name ever. Just it really is. Nigel Cutthroat. It's exactly what he is. He is Nigel Cutthroat. So you know, it's time spent. So beating a game became time spent. Roguelike is a super good reaction to that. Like, talk about a great like reaction to like. I want that fail mechanic that the old arcade games had, but I don't want that repetitiveness, right? I don't want the. Oh my God, I have to play through that level again. Oh my God, I'm so bored of level 1. I've never seen level 10, but level 1, my God. If I play it again, I'm going to murder myself. And roguelike's a great reaction to that. It's like, look, you can fail. It's really hard to beat that game. You know, beating Diablo on hardcore, like some people say, oh, it's a different play style. You just have to be more careful. And there's some truth to that, but it's not, you know, you also have to have a minimum skill level, right? You can't just go in and pay no attention and just like have your eyes half closed, like me right now, where I'm just sort of like clicking. You have to really like, you know, make sure you don't make any big mistakes, because if you die, you're done, and that's it, and then it's over. You have to start all over again. And you know, that was a reaction for a roguelike, is like, we want that, like, I'm going to be awesome. I have to be awesome to beat this game. But I don't want to play through level 1 1,000 times. Cool. I do, yeah, I want a scoundrel with two-handed ranged weapon guy. That's awesome. Because I have pets to tank for me right now. Any case, so then, you know, you've also had, like, you know, if you think about, like, yeah, like, Call of Duty, great example. The single-player version of Call of Duty, I would almost not call a game. And that's not to put it down in any way. I love Call of Duty. Call of Duty is great, right? But it's like an interactive experience, right? Like, and what I mean, and what I mean by that is, like, what are your choices as a player? Well, they tell you, like, hit E to kick out the window or whatever, right? That's not a choice. I mean, you can die, but it's, you know, it's not really a choice. It's a, like, if you do this, you will progress. If you don't, you will not, right? But but the goal there is interesting. Fantasy will heal himself. I guess you could heal, because I don't really need either of these because I have pets, but we're gonna let them vanish. Um, you know, it's an interactive experience in that like the goal of it is to create that emotional journey for the player. It's like, oh wow, I remember when I was in the car underwater and I was like with my buddies and like we were trying to get out and I kicked out the window and then my buddy did this and I could tell a story about it, right? And that's why I call it an interactive experience. And a lot of games should have went that way. And it was like, you know, it went like oh man, we need to like really make sure no one gets left behind. We don't want like anyone to fail at the game. Like we want people to experience this really expensive, bespoke story. And even games that weren't necessarily interactive experiences started to lean that way. And like every game going roguelike right now, or every game having those elements, I think is a reaction to that, where it's like people want you know, they don't want to be led by the nose. Like it's Minecraft, right? Like where you get to build anything you want, and like you know that is the zeitgeist, right? Is this creation, and games just start shifting. You know, they're just starting to shift back that way. And rogue-like elements, I think, are just one real. I'm gonna give my guy new crossbow because he deserves it. I like him a lot. I think he's a great guy. Roguelike elements are a great way to, you know, create games with those freedoms and also have challenge and you know, and not guide the player by the nose, right? Like, wow, I'm now playing, you know, Don't Starve and I'm trying to survive and I have no idea what my, you know, what environment I'm going to be put into this time. I don't know what's going to be around me. I don't know what monsters I'm going to face or where they are. So it's, you know, that's cool. And at the same time, you know, it's incorporated this new level, right? It's not just about the numbers. It's about like, oh, I gotta survive. How am I gonna build my area up? Like, you know, there's a new level of it's like, you know, this creation level, right? And I think that's great. It's just the evolution of the roguelike, right? Like, what is a roguelike if, you know, it's relationships and the randomness is actually in the relationships you can form, right? There's another layer of just like the same concept. It's roguelike is in randomness. Lots of item drops. Well, items don't have to be items. They could be people. I don't know, whatever, right? It's and it's not to say every game is a rogue, but every game, you know, we can if we take those three attributes: randomness, random levels, lots of item drops, permadeath, and we could take those three attributes, and I think that's why things are often called roguelikes, even though they're not. But those three attributes are being applied more and more to games, and I think it's because of, if you look at that, right, from arcade coin days, right, of like, well, we design games to need to be played through the same content that was really expensive to make over and over again because we need to get enough quarters to sustain the business, right? And that was the foundation there. And then it, you know, it has evolved, and you said, well, you know, now we can, you know, we could let people play from beginning to end through the content, like in the Mario Brothers, and this, because we figured out a way to make, you know, more money. Really, is instead of making these $4,000 arcade games, we can make these $50 cartridges that we sell to people at home, right? Like Nintendo and Sega Genesis and all that. So now we can afford to make, you know, content, higher quality content. You only have to play through once, and then, you know, but then people are like, well, now I just, you know, so, you know, I'm going to put a lot of time in, and like Mario, yeah, they have a certain level of skill, but a lot of games, you know, you just, especially RPGs, you know, with artificial progression, where your character's leveling up. If I grind long enough, I'm probably going to be so powerful, I'm going to get through the game, right? So then you get to roguelike, and then for the roguelike, you know, where does that go? And it's always good to think about these evolutions and where they came from. And, you know, when we think about games at that high level, where are they going to go next, right? Like, how can we take all, now that we're in a new era, right? There's a lot of content out there. How do we continue to evolve at that high of a level, right? It's not just about, you know, because I think it'll be interesting to see, especially with VR coming out, and like interactive experiences, I think are going to really be a big thing, right? Like, man, like just imagine experiencing Call of Duty in VR, my God. I mean, it's gonna be cool. So, any case, this is Diablo, the third time I've gone through it, and see you guys next time. Bye.